Peter Credlin, live on Sky News Australia.
Good evening, great to have your company. Welcome to the program. Here's what's coming up tonight on Credlin. The PM has capped off a horror week with one of his worst performances on Talkback Radio this morning, effectively throwing his ministers under the bus and even then refusing to apologise for the slur on Peter Dutton. This comes as Labor ministers on the right pointedly distance themselves from this low-rent attack. I'll bring you all that audio of the PM's shocker on radio in a moment. More madness when it comes to gender medicine in Australia, with doctors claiming young girls have testicular disorders in order to prescribe testosterone. I'll speak to the journalist who uncovered this story and cover that speech in the Parliament that's blown it all public. Plus, explosive reports in the New York Times that Israel was warned about the October 7 atrocities as a ceasefire ended earlier today and fighting again resumed in Gaza. We'll speak with defence expert Malcolm Davis for the latest. And he might have a thick skin, but today Peter Dutton refuses to rule out suing Labor ministers over the protector of pedophiles slur.
It's pretty offensive. Will you take legal action?
I would wait to see whether there's an apology forthcoming and then make a decision after that. But I think in the end what it is a distraction away from what's been a debacle for this government.
But first, with the parliamentary year drawing to a close, even the most generous supporters will be forced to conclude that the Albanese government is in serious trouble. Now, it's not just those news poll numbers this week that for the first time had the government and the opposition neck and neck, but also the catastrophic fall in Labor's primary vote, the worst set of numbers in more than a decade. It's not just that foreign criminals legislation that was so urgent, we were told, Parliament had to pass it immediately at the beginning of the week, that hasn't even been introduced by week's end. Or that the government's own policies on energy and workplace relations are making the cost of living crisis worse. Or that government's only real achievement, a budget surplus for the first time in 15 years, well, that's an accidental one that owes nothing to prudent decision-making or frugality and everything to the serendipity of continued sky-high commodity prices, the very coal and gas resources, of course, that the government wants us to keep in the ground and never use. It's more that this government has been exposed as a bunch of third-rate amateurs, with ministers out of their depth and a Prime Minister who's incapable of taking charge when his underlings stuff up. Now, as I said last night, you know a government's in trouble when it starts lying to protect itself. And you know it's in even bigger trouble when it starts lying about its opponents because the self-serving lies are no longer credible. But it's almost unprecedented when senior members start disassociating themselves from their own party's lies. In Parliament yesterday, the Prime Minister refused to apologise for the despicable lie peddled by his own ministers that the opposition leader was somehow a protector of pedophiles.
We saw the opposition, led by the Leader of the Opposition, come into the chamber and vote to protect pedophiles over children.
The Leader of the Opposition intervened as the then Minister for Immigration to allow the convicted pedophile at the centre of the High Court case, NZYQ, to apply for a new visa.
The Home Affairs Minister has accused Peter Dutton of being a protector of pedophiles. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Even though the Speaker of the Parliament, who is a Labor appointee and expected to protect the government, had ordered the main offender, the utterly underwhelming Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neill, to withdraw the slur.
On Monday, Speaker, we saw the opposition, led by the Leader of the Opposition, come into the chamber and vote to protect pedophiles over children. That's what they did.
I request that you demand the Minister withdraw that disgusting slur that she's repeated on a number of occasions. It is below contempt.
I'm going to ask the Minister to make sure her language is tempered and to make sure that she is not reflecting upon members.
Earlier in the day, firebrand Liberal Michaelia Cash called on the Prime Minister to pull his ministers into line over the slur and been mad enough, she said, to apologise to Dutton.
These comments have clearly been endorsed by the Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese. They are a reflection on Mr Albanese and the type of leader he is. They are despicable, they are disgraceful, they are beneath contempt.
But as we know, in the Parliament, he didn't. So it was left to retiring broadcaster Melbourne's Neil Mitchell on the last day in the job to call the PM out for the shameful protector of pedophiles lie and his failure as the leader to rein in his ministers. That is, of course, if they were defaming Dutton without the PM's say-so or that of his office.
Is there an apology there?
Well,
is there an apology for him?
Hang on. Ask me about things I've done, and I'll be happy
but they're your
to be
ministers.
accountable for them. Oh, Neil, he moved a motion yesterday in the Parliament saying essentially that we wanted a range of, I won't repeat on the program, a range of, including child sex offenders, rapists, everyone, that we wanted them out on the streets. He did that yesterday.
So in reply, you say he's protecting pedophiles. Terrific. Thank you for that. I mean, that's terrific standard of debate. You've really improved the quality of politics. That's outrageous. I mean, all right, he's insulted you. Take the high moral ground. Apologise.
Neil.
Yes,
I'm accountable for what I say.
They're your ministers. You're the boss.
Look, it was an extraordinary interview. It was a vintage Mitchell, in fact, and he didn't let up.
You apologise to him or not? Are you standing with your ministers?
Neil, I'm accountable for what I say.
Prime Minister, you're the boss. You're the boss.
It's about time that Peter Dutton took responsibility for what he said.
So I'll repeat the question. Do you stand by what your ministers said?
Neil, I stand by everything that I say, and I stand by the fact that my ministers have been doing everything they can to protect community safety, and Peter Dutton from day one has been focused on just politics.
You can solve it all here by just making that point and apologising.
I hate to tell you, Neil, but I can't solve it all here.
You know what they say, the fish rots from the head. Now, when asked about this on morning television, Peter Dutton had this to say.
So, I've got thick skin. I give as good as I can take, but I think the Labor Party, the Prime Minister, crossed the line this week. The fact is, it's a complete opposite of the truth, and you can say that's the rough and tumble of politics. But I really think the wheels are falling off this government. I think they're becoming more and more desperate, and they lash out like this. And the Prime Minister sent his ministers out. He didn't even have the guts to go out and make the comments himself.
Have you got an apology yet? Do you expect one?
I haven't got an apology yet. I would have thought, if he's man enough, he'll apologise, but I'm not expecting one, so that's up to him.
But as weak and gutless as the Prime Minister might be on this coordinated slur, there was a marked show of decency from the government's two most senior ministers from the right, former leader Bill Shorten and Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles, because both Shorten and Marles pointedly distanced themselves from Labor's protector of pedophiles smear. Shorten said that Dutton should have supported Labor's legislation earlier in the week, but when asked about the pedophile claim, could hardly have made his disapproval more clear when he said, "They are not my words."
Do you endorse the accusation? Are you prepared to repeat the accusation that Peter Dutton protects pedophiles?
They're not my words.
Of course, nearly all governments suffer from midterm blues. In this case, though, Albanese's been totally shell-shocked since his voice was defeated. And it's clear he's taken refuge in overseas travel rather than taking charge of his government. Labor insiders and strategists are promising the party faithful they'll use the summer to reset. But the government's only idea for reviving its fortunes is more handouts, more vote buying, which will put its budget surplus at risk, make inflationary pressures worse, and if it succeeds in lifting Labor's spirits and the polls, will reflect more on the obviously ambitious Treasurer Jin Chalmers than the Prime Minister. Meanwhile, having well judged the public mood on The Voice, and with a promise to start releasing key policy positions in the new year, Peter Dutton is looking more and more credible. More and more credible as the alternative Prime Minister. And that's exactly why Labor has attacked him as hard and as personally as they have this week. All right, wrapping up the end of a, as I said, pretty hectic sitting week. We'll go now to Canberra. Sky News political reporter Trudy McIntosh.
Good evening. Border Force has warned that people smugglers are seeking to take advantage of the High Court ruling that led to the release of detainees into the community.
Criminals will seek to manipulate that decision.
A new messaging blitz aimed at asylum seekers wanting to come to Australia by boat. The commander of Operation Sovereign Borders says the asylum seeker boat, which arrived in Western Australia, was not related, as authorities monitor for any other attempts.
There is no link between the High Court decision and Operation Sovereign Borders activity other than the likelihood that criminal maritime people smugglers will manipulate that decision.
The detainee drama has descended into a debate about whether Labor should apologise after these repeated remarks.
The Leader of the Opposition come into the chamber and vote to protect pedophiles over children.
I think the Labor Party, the Prime Minister, crossed the line this week. That I would have thought, if he's man enough, he'll apologise.
The PM didn't admonish his ministers, but crucially, he didn't repeat the claim himself.
I'm accountable for what I say.
They're your ministers, you're the boss.
I'm accountable for what I say.
And states are threatening to impose their own new taxes as a fight erupts with the Treasurer over the GST. State Treasurers released their own communique after meeting Jim Chalmers in Brisbane. They warn without extending the GST guarantee, the federal government will be responsible for new state taxes or levies to pay for essential services. Labor states also threaten to scuttle NDIS reforms unless their demands are met. Trudy McIntosh, Sky News, Canberra.
As I said, a hectic week to wrap up. Joining me now to do all of that, One Nation Chief of Staff James Ashby and the wonderful Luke Grant back with us now, Radio 2GB host. I've missed you, Luke Grant. I'll get into you if I can. We'll start with you. This protector of pedophiles line they've thrown at Peter Dutton. Actually, it's not a line, it's a slur. It's desperate stuff. You know his history as a former police detective. He worked in this specific area of sex assault. Now, I can't believe they've kept this up. I can't believe they're still out there today. The Prime Minister on your colleague Neil Mitchell's final show in Melbourne refusing to apologise. And I can tell viewers this stuff doesn't happen. You know, you don't attack the opposition leader or you don't attack the Prime Minister without the senior office of the PM or the Leader of the Opposition authorising it. So there's no doubt this attack on Dutton was authorised by the PM and or his office. Give us a sense how this will be going down with voters, because I suspect it'll be going down like a lead balloon.
You're 100% correct. Nice to see you, Peter. I've missed being on too. The comments from listeners today were the condemnation surprised me. The immediacy of their response. People have had a gutful because they were promised a better polity, weren't they? We had the Prime Minister and others in Labor saying that when we get into power, things will be a whole lot better. And to think that even for more than one parliamentary question time, they allowed this to exist in the ether, this, the protector of pedophile lines. I don't know if I've heard anything worse in the Parliament. And for the front benches, the ministers, and for the Prime Minister to say to Neil today, I'm responsible for my words, so what is it now? So we take it that Albo is responsible for everything that he directly does. Everything else by every other minister, every other part of the government is none of his business. I mean, it's laughable. Yeah. They've been embarrassed by a news poll, and you said this, I watch you every night, you said this earlier in the week. They were embarrassed by that news poll. They've been shocked, they're panicked, they don't know what to do. And what we're seeing here is what we saw in the pandemic, let's not forget. Every opportunity they got, they bagged what the then government was doing. No one had dealt with the pandemic. And now we're seeing it again. All they've got is abuse. It's appalling.
I have to say, I reckon the Emperor's got no clothes. I think people are starting to see very much through Anthony Albanese, as they did through Kevin Rudd. It takes a bit of time. Australian voters like to give them the benefit of the doubt, James. But for all their tough talk, all this tough talk about, we're going to have this terrific legislation, we'll do something on detainees, we'll sort out the issue with the terrorists and their dual citizenship. We know none of those bills are in the Parliament. They were supposed to get in and out, past the Parliament this week. They'll have to go into the Senate, I'm told, on Monday or perhaps Tuesday. And right now, we have nothing like what they promised at the end of the week.
Peter, the Labor Party and their ministers have clearly had cocktail parties to attend on Friday night and across the weekend. I certainly said 4 weeks ago when this issue started to blow up, there would be a preparation from One Nation senators to sit right through an entire weekend or 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it took to make sure this legislation was a priority for the safety and sake of Australia. The slur, I think that's understating exactly how Labor have played their rhetoric against Peter Dutton. He is one of the most, I'd have to say, he is the most genuine gentleman within our parliament. I know Peter Dutton. He's not part of our party, but I can tell you who the real buggers in that place are. He's not one of them. He is a man that has dedicated his entire life right through the police force, and then, of course, in his ministerial role, protecting Australians. He's introduced legislation in the past. He's brought in dogs that can sniff out USBs, which protect Australians against pedophiles, these people that want to bring in pornographic images of children. He has implemented systems with the Five Eyes, so many different ways to protect Australians. This government have no idea on how to protect Aussies, and the cheap shot they've taken at him, I believe he should sue for defamation. It is just disgusting, the attack they've taken on the opposition leader, and I hope plenty of these ministers go down. This will be a one-term government. The Albanese government will not last a second term.
It's interesting too, Annika Wells is the most in trouble there because she's repeated it outside the parliament. All the others have used their parliamentary privilege. And I'll say this too, you know, he's been a tremendous supporter of the Morecambe Foundation. Let's go on to other things that are coming though, Luke, as fallout from this mishandling of detention. We had that boat arriving too into Java. We've got this issue with the dual nationals. We're getting warnings today from Border Force saying we're getting a rush of activity. They obviously monitor social media accounts and others of people smugglers. There's been a surge of arrivals into Indonesia. I'll say it again, you cannot trust Labor on border because quite simply they just don't believe in border protection, do they?
No, they don't. Peter, you're 100% correct. They don't. They don't. It's a policy area for which they have no passion and no great interest. So you can imagine the conversations. Oh, look at Australia. You float there in a boat, you commit a crime, you're found guilty, and then all of a sudden you wait long enough and the courts let you out. Now, that's going to excite all sorts of conversations and activity, and we're hearing that from our border officials. But unless you hold the line, and you know this better than anyone, you're part of the government that fixed Labor's last problem. Unless you are playing this 100%, 110%, if you will, of the time, then they'll look at you. They'll say, right, business opportunity, here we go. And we're seeing it now. We shouldn't be surprised.
Let's not forget,
you know, they always don't, Peter, say, oh, you know, it's different now, but it's not.
It's not, and let's not forget under Labor, of course, they get all that welfare when they're there, even the criminals that are out on the streets. Just staying on immigration if we can, James, a whole lot of business leaders are out there. They can sense the public mood. Punters have had enough of these record high migration rates. So business are warning, don't cut it back, government. Please keep migration as high as possible. But there's an interesting story, partly picked up, I picked it up certainly during the week, but partly picked up elsewhere, about this record number of refugee applications out of Afghanistan from Afghanis. Now, this is since August alone. 200,000 protection visa applications. 200,000. Now, if you go back to the Howard era, we took in 160,000 tops in a year. That's 200,000 applications in a couple of months. That's on top of the 150,000 applications already in the pipeline. Now, given they're coming out of Afghanistan, it's now controlled by the Taliban. How confident are you the department's going to vet them properly as they should?
Peter, the Australian public should have zero confidence in the vetting process that will see potentially the largest intake of Muslim so-called refugees under these protection visas. And let's not forget, a lot of these initial intake will be what they class as priority ones, where these are unaccompanied women. Now, we all know that what happens is these people might come in on protection visas, they never go home, and then within a couple of years, we open the floodgates again to a system called family reunion. And you can bet what'll happen is they'll bring their boyfriends, husbands, multiple husbands, whatever it might be, over in a new intake. And so we've already got over 800,000 Muslims already living in Australia. We've seen the demonstrations on our streets in recent weeks over the Israeli-Palestinian saga which has been going on over there. Now, don't forget there's only 7,000 Palestinians in Australia. Who are the rest of these people demonstrating? I can tell you, and I think those at home can assume as well. This is a bad move. Australia has a particular makeup. I don't want to see that makeup changed. And many people at home would agree this is not the right way. We do not have the ability to take in these numbers.
And I want to just underscore some points you were making there, because we've always had a non-discriminatory migration program. We don't see faith, we don't see country, we just see a proper application and it's vetted and all of those things we talk about. But what's happening here is by the volume coming out of certain countries and the volume coming out via those countries in terms of religious representation, we're getting a skewering of some of the mix in our country. And I think right now, up until now, we've got the balance right. I'd be just as cranky if we're getting, you know, a whole bunch of people out of Eritrea or a whole bunch of people out of Kenya. We don't want to preference one country over another. This is the risk with 200,000 coming out of Afghanistan, as we've said, 150 in the pipeline. Let's go, if we can, COP28, Luke, the annual talk fest by the United Nations, which I love this year because we get all of these elites coming in on their private planes, landing in Dubai, which of course was built on oil and gas. Talk about hypocrisy there. Nuclear, though, we're told will be on the table. Terrific, because we absolutely need nuclear power here in Australia. But we won't be in this debate because we've ruled it out. And Chris Bowen, again, keeps saying that they'll do nothing to lift the ban. This is where it's crazy, isn't it?
Well, it is. And again, we had Albo. His legacy was going to be the voice. Bobo Bowen's legacy is going to be the first ever cop in Australia. He's over there to bring the event to Australia. Everything else, I think, doesn't matter. And to think he's mute on nuclear is a disgrace.
Yeah, it is absolutely great. All right, I've got to leave it there. I've been told I've got to wrap up. Lots to get through tonight, gentlemen. Thank you. Great to see you, Luke. James, as always. All right, let's go to some other issues. This whole issue about young people. There's been a huge surge in young females identifying as transgender and then embarking on lifelong and taxpayer-funded testosterone treatment. This comes just 8 years after it was ruled that females who identify as the opposite sex or non-binary can get a public subsidy to masculinise their bodies with synthetic testosterone. Here is Liberal Senator Claire Chandler on the matter.
Thousands of young Australian women and girls under 18 are being prescribed a drug which has permanent and irreversible impacts on their bodies, while our medical authorities turn a blind eye to the manipulating of the PBS to have taxpayers pay for it, even as other countries have woken up to the dangers because of the extremely low evidence-based and the devastating side effects detransitioners are now living with.
Right, that was a speech made in the Parliament this week. Not a lot of coverage. It should have a lot more coverage. So to rectify that, I'm joined now by the journalist who broke the issue, Gender Clinic News, Bernard Lane. Bernard, thank you for your time. Take us through these taxpayer-funded procedures. What do they entail? How old are some of the people undergoing them?
Thanks, Peter. Well, this data shows about 1,500 girls and young women last year started on taxpayer subsidised testosterone, supposedly to treat the male condition of androgen deficiency, which is generally caused by a testicular disorder. The age groups range from about 9 to 13 is the lowest age group, up until about 33. So that's the focus that the data is on, is that group of both minors and young women.
So one of the things people might not understand at home, and I certainly didn't appreciate it till I underwent many years of IVF, is whereas men replenish and basically manufacture sperm all the way through their life, women only have the eggs we are born with, which is why the clock ticks for women. What's the ramifications for young girls going down the path of testosterone? Because if they erode or diminish their egg supply in any way, if they change their mind, what's the chances of getting pregnant and detransitioning? Because that's a big point that Claire Chandler talks about.
Yes, that's right, Peter. So these, let's focus on the young girls. They identify as male, and so they may not want to look after their reproductive system. But when they're given high doses of synthetic testosterone, you know, this is a drug introduced into the body, it's not present in those natural levels in females, then the effects on the reproductive system can be severe. And it seems, I mean, there's a lack of research, but it seems that there's quite a reasonable risk of sterilisation as a result of testosterone. Also, detransitioners in the United States are saying that after a few years on testosterone, they were suffering from vaginal atrophy, in some cases so bad that they had to have a hysterectomy at quite a young age, which has all sorts of its own health effects.
Goodness me. And what about this push? Give us an update for other more surgical procedures. Some they want on the on Medicare taxpayer-funded payments. I mean, this is a chest surgery, genital reconfiguration. I note that the Parliament, when asked to hold an inquiry to look at the yes and the no case of going down this path with young people, the Parliament did not improve an inquiry, which says to me they're not even prepared to hear a counter view. What's the latest, Bernard?
Yes, well, that application by the Plastic Surgeons Society is seeking full public subsidy for a whole range of transgender surgeries. The most common appear to be mastectomies for biological females, but also creation of an artificial vagina in males, including a procedure where, because the male doesn't have much sensitive penile tissue left after puberty blockers, they use a section of the colon to create an artificial vagina, which is very risky. And in the original Dutch research using these treatments, one of the patients died as a result of complications from that procedure. And so the Plastic Surgeons Society here in Australia, they want to do that procedure and a whole range of other transgender surgeries with full public subsidy.
And this is where we've got to have these inquiries. We've got to have all the cards on the table. We've certainly seen that overseas, but for some reason that fails me, it's being blocked by Labor and the Greens in the Parliament in Australia. Bernard Lane, thank you. Keep up your important work. All right, after the break, the ceasefire now well and truly over. In Gaza, we've seen those shocking allegations emerge about what the Israelis knew about October 7 terror attacks. Plus, I'll catch up with a firefighter still stood down in Victoria despite warnings of a bad summer ahead because of vaccine mandates. Welcome back. Coming up, hard to believe, but 30 firefighters in Victoria still unable to work because of ongoing COVID vaccine mandates. Of course, just as we're about to hit bushfire season. But now to a story published in the New York Times today, which claims that Israeli officials obtained Hamas's battle plan for the October 7 terror attacks over a year before they were carried out, according to documents, emails and interviews revealed by Times journalists. I'll note the Times reports that although Israel officials knew of the Hamas plans, it says they dismissed them as impossible. And as reported earlier, that ceasefire well and truly over. It is now back to war fighting. Conflict, of course, resuming there between Israel and Gaza and Hamas. Joining me now to get the latest, senior analyst at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, Malcolm Davis. Malcolm, thank you for your time. Let's start with those revelations in the Times today. What's your response?
Look, mistakes are often made in terms of intelligence assessment. You just need to look at 9/11, where sort of we should have seen the warning signs there and we didn't. And I think this is a similar sort of situation where clearly intelligence indicators and warnings were picked up, were assessed, and then put up the line to the senior leaders, and they were dismissed for whatever reason. The assumption being, I think, on this occasion was that Hamas didn't have the military capability to do such a massive attack, and that was wrong. And I think that it just goes to show that the intelligence business is a tricky one in terms of ensuring that not only do you get the assessment correct, but you then have a way to get political leaders to listen when they do need to listen. And sometimes it just doesn't work.
You're so right to pick up that point about the listening. I'd also say too, I think Israel was hampered. It withdrew from Gaza about a decade ago, so it lacks that human intelligence component. It's not all just technological surveillance. It's not all just picking up emails, isn't it? I mean, that's, I think, one of the things that's been missed a little bit around the world as we've got more and more technology and cyber surveillance. We've perhaps defunded or underfunded the human involvement of the spy network, and that's critically important as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, spying is the world's second oldest profession for a good reason, because essentially it's so effective if it can be done well. The ability to essentially be able to gather a sort of a collection of informants that will pass you the right information for you to be on the spot, to be able to gather that information, I think is really crucial. Too often we resort to the technology solution rather than thinking about the human solution.
What about blowback in and around Israel, in the region, or more broadly?
Well, I think it's fair to say that at the end of this war, Netanyahu, I think, will not survive the revelations that they had a year's warning of this attack, and they dismissed it when they should have listened to it. So I think the blowback there is political in terms of Netanyahu's future career, but clearly they're not going to change prime ministers in the middle of a war. But I do think that there will be lessons learned from this, not just for the Israelis, but for all Western militaries, in terms of how do we think about intelligence, how do we think about threat assessment. This has implications not just for Israel, but also for the US and its allies in the Indo-Pacific in terms of China. You know, do we get our assessment right of China? If we don't, then we could potentially pay a cost in lives and capability in some future conflict.
Look, absolutely spot on. When I heard about the terror attacks, the first thing that went through my head is Mossad, this is the Israeli intelligence agency for those at home, one of the best in the game. And if this fails Mossad, I think we're all in trouble around the world, and I hope everyone's doing belts and braces against their own agencies, testing their own agencies, but I think that will be something that will come out of all of this. Just this truce this afternoon, the expiration of that and the resumption of fighting. We haven't got all the hostages out, of course. Do you think we'll ever get another ceasefire in the near term, or are we back to really ramping up the conflict here?
I doubt another ceasefire in the near term. I think that the conflict will go back into full pace. The Israelis know that they have to defeat Hamas decisively. I would go so far as to say that they have to rout them because they cannot allow Hamas to remain in existence in any form that would allow them to launch further attacks on Israel. So I think that the fighting will continue. It will intensify. The challenge, of course, for the Israelis is the further south they push in Gaza, the greater risk of high levels of civilian casualties. And the more casualties there are, the more international pressure there will be on Israel to have another ceasefire. So they're caught between a rock and a hard place in the sense that they can't have an indefinite ceasefire whilst Hamas exists. But if they want to destroy Hamas, they run the risk of civilian casualties and coming under more pressure for a ceasefire.
And I have to say, as regrettable as those civilian casualties are, the world must be rid of Hamas. So it's a Hobson's choice, I think we'll call it. Malcolm Davis, thank you.
Thank you very much.
There, Malcolm Davis. Let's go to the bushfire issue because the season has arrived. Although, I'm in Sydney tonight and it's wet. Where's that hot summer we were promised? But down in Victoria, there are still 30 professional firefighters who are unable to work because they've refused or can't have a COVID vaccine. Why is this? Because Fire Rescue Victoria still has a vaccine mandate in place, while the rest of the country sees our emergency services and hospitals and many others without those vaccine mandates. Joining me now for the latest, and we've had him on before. I want to stay across this issue. Andrew Hughes from the Australian Firefighters Alliance. Andrew, welcome. Take us through the details here, because I'm particularly interested in the allegation that Fire Services Victoria has tried to cover up some sort of vaccine risk assessment. What does that mean? What can you tell us?
Oh, hi, Peter. Thank you very much again for having me on. It's a pleasure to speak with you, and absolutely disappointing that I have to come here again and advocate on behalf of 30 to up to potentially 50 employees still suffering from this. In essence, the fire agency were forced to update their risk assessment in April of this year following a WorkSafe site visit, following reports of unsafe work practices and vaccine-injured employees. Now, following that, this report and risk assessment were presented to a committee which is comprised of union reps, employee health and safety reps, senior health and safety personnel and executives. Now, since that was presented, and this risk assessment contains acknowledgement of COVID-19 vaccine injuries up to and including death and serious health conditions. This information has not seen the light of day by employees. They have not been in receipt of this information or warned about these risks. Now, as I said, the people involved in this committee have had knowledge since, and it was only recently, as of about 6 weeks ago, this document was finally obtained under Freedom of Information. Now, I'd actually like to read a quote from Victorian Parliament as of 2 days ago. The brave member for Eastern Victoria region, Renee Heath, made this statement to the Emergency Services Minister. She said, "A Freedom of Information document regarding vaccine injuries in fire and rescue has recently come to light. The information revealed in this FOI request is confronting. And what's even more concerning is how Fire Rescue Victoria and the Firefighters Union have conspired to suppress it." Now, I'll say the risk assessment, as I said, contains some pretty serious risks up to and including death. She went on to say she's worried about the thousands of firefighters who have had this information deliberately kept from them, despite repeated attempts by members to secure it. I, among other people, have been threatened with disciplinary action and directed to cease correspondence because we've been persistent about raising these concerns and trying to obtain this document.
Let me just jump in there. Right around the country, the world's moved on from COVID. Most emergency services, if not all, most hospitals, nurses, etc., don't have these mandates anymore. They don't exist. There might be some rules around the most vulnerable, as there should be in nursing homes, but broadly speaking, it's not an issue anymore. It is an issue, though, in Victoria. And I can't for the life of me understand, given how much gear you guys and women wear when you go and fight fires, the fact that most people are out of the fires by the time you go in. You're fighting smoke. You can't really transmit to a human being, even if this was a worry. Given how Victoria has some of the worst statistics on fire in the country, the loss of life in Victoria is like no other state. Why on earth, going into summer, aren't you all back on the roster?
Well, it's a really interesting question. I'd answer it in two parts, Peter. The first is a recent example. On Grand Final Day, there were reportedly up to 13 fire appliances that had dropped their minimum staffing. Usually there's 4 on a truck. In this case, there was 3 on 13 appliances. The other part of it is, despite all of those things that may prevent spread, a lot of those points are even moot, I'd have to say, Peter, because this risk assessment that has been concealed acknowledges that ongoing booster requirements, as in line with the TARGI recommendations, needed to be kept up to date for employees. Now, firefighters and employees, all employees of the fire agency, should be on their 6th and potentially thinking about their 7th dose by now in order to maintain their protectiveness. So do they need to take these things or do they not need to take them? The last dose anyone took was required by March 2022. That's nearly 21 months ago.
Yeah, you're making the point that even if they had all the jabs, they're out of date under the COVID rules in terms of how quickly the vaccines wear off. Andrew Hughes, thank you. Keep coming back on the show. We want to keep the pressure on. I know people watching at home can't fathom this nonsense, but here we are. Thank you. Have a good Christmas. All right, coming up, we might be ready to celebrate. I certainly am. Put the tree up, the whole bizzo. But councils right around the country, well, they're getting busy to cancel Christmas. Plus, 2 members of the royal family named in their book as racist. This is the Meghan and Harry book-ish. I'll get to that in a moment. The UK will go there for the latest on that as well. Welcome back. Well, now to the UK, where 2 very senior members of the royal family have been named as racist in a book called Endgame, written by royal commentator Omid Scobie. Joining me now for the details, editor of Spate, contributor to the UK Spectator, Tom Slater. Tom, welcome. Now, as I understand it, the royals weren't supposed to be named. That's the line by the author. It certainly hasn't happened in the books that have been published in the UK. My colleague, Piers Morgan, has named them. I think it's an esoteric argument if I don't repeat what he said. The names are Charles, as in the King, and Catherine, as in the Princess of Wales. But how legitimate are these allegations? And Harry and Meghan, I mean, have they distanced themselves from Scobie, the author, or is he seen basically as their mouthpiece?
Well, yes. I mean, how legitimate are these allegations? I mean, you have to look at the source. I mean, Omid Scobie is a sort of celebrity journalist who suddenly became a royal correspondent, very much hitched his wagon to Harry and Meghan, and is quite widely seen as kind of Meghan's representative on earth, really. Meghan had to admit in court a couple of years ago, having previously said she had no contact with him, that she had actually briefed her aides to brief him for a previous book he wrote about the royal couple. He claims that he didn't want the royals to be named, and yet the reason this has come out is because the name suddenly appeared in the Dutch edition of the book. He puts it down to a translation error, but you can't translate names out of nowhere. So many questions have been raised about whether or not this is a publicity stunt. So there's the questions of where this is coming from, which is this particular journalist, and also ultimately potentially Meghan, the kind of Walter Mitty of Montecito. But also there's the question of what the allegations are themselves. We should remember this essentially comes down to what Meghan and Harry alleged was what they see as an unpleasant conversation where there was speculation about what skin colour their son might have. And it's the sort of thing that as many people, including the great comedian Chris Rock, has pointed out, that's a conversation that even the all families of many different ethnicities might have in a mixed race family. So even if the allegations are true, it's the sort of thing, depending on the context, depending on how it was said, it does feel like it's only really serious if you're the sort of person who wants to willfully take offence to things. So what the problem is that as soon as you make the kind of allegations of racism is effectively being made here, those things do tend to stick. And I dare say that Scobie and any of his sources were well aware of that fact.
I have to underscore that point there. I'm a very tall family, and when people in my family have married shorter people, there's been a debate, are they going to get dad's height or mum's height? We know in a multicultural country like Australia, there's a wonderful sort of melting pot of genes that come out with family members. It's something you talk about. It's not a racist comment. It's an interested comment that family members make. I'm interested, though, where are Brits landing on this? I mean, are they on the side of the California whingers or on the side of working royals in London? What's the mood in Britain on this?
Well, I dare say it's sort of implied in your question there. Very much, I think people are seeing this as another painful edition of the Harry and Meghan circus. And you've only got to look at the polls. I mean, Prince William and the Princess of Wales, Catherine, they are consistently, essentially, among the 2 most popular royals in the country. Harry and Meghan are way down at the bottom. They're only beaten to the kind of sin bin spot by one Prince Andrew, which I think tells you something about how low their stock is with the public. So as I say, there is the danger that these kind of allegations stick in a slightly unpleasant way. But at the same time, it's quite clear that as far as whereas the British public are concerned, they're very much on the side of people who are just quietly getting on with the job rather than people who are carping from the sidelines.
Hey, just quick before we go, when I was there recently, those rallies, those pro-Palestinian, sort of pro-Hamas rallies were huge and the numbers were growing. How's that tracking now? Is it still a feature on the weekends?
They've become a weekly feature, unfortunately. The last time they came out, it was another carnival of Jew hatred. But what's been positive is that we did have this huge march against anti-Semitism last weekend. And I think the silent majority are beginning to find their voice in terms of condemning the Jew hatred they're seeing on their streets.
That is good to hear. I hope that happens here in Australia too. Tom Slater, thank you for your time. All right, coming up, PM in trouble, shocker of a week. And big morning today for Melbourne commuters. 3AW's Neil Mitchell hangs up the microphone for good. Welcome back. Well, I've got my double trouble on the desk with me in Sydney. Joining me now, as I do every Friday, Sky News contributors Tina McQueen, Prue McSween. Ladies, great to be in situ,
We
real
love
life.
it.
Yep, 3D. A shocker of a week for Albanese. I don't think I've seen a worse week in many years. How would you rate it all?
What? Yes, he's had a bad week, but I tell you, Dutton has been spectacular. He's really finding his way. He's being brave and bold, sticking to policies and principles that are very liberal. It's making the base very happy. So, yes, Albanese turned out to be a real dud, and we're getting very excited about the next election, Peter. The other thing is that we haven't had before, the donors are coming out of the woodworks. Which they closed up under ScoMo. But no, they've really opened up and prepared to back Mr Dutton.
She used to be Vice President of the Liberal Party, so she would know a fair bit about where the money goes and where it comes from. What I thought was extraordinary today, so the Prime Minister goes on Neil Mitchell and distanced himself. First of all, wouldn't apologise for the comments made by his ministers, and you know that ministers don't attack the Leader of the Opposition or on the other side attack the Prime Minister without the top boss in the office signing this off. I can tell you that's exactly how it works. So didn't apologise, refused to apologise, pushed really hard by Mitchell, but also said, oh, well, you know, I'm not responsible for what my ministers say. Well, what sort of PM's that, Prue?
Well, he's not responsible for anything, I believe. You know, this is the problem, that he's got a real character flaw and we're all getting to see it. You know, from the start, when he was never across any detail. Then this obsession and this poor judgment with the voice. And then the sulking. And this ridiculous thing that he was so wooed by this international jet setting and being on that stage. While at home, you know, Rome's burning. And he has lost touch. He has no control over his ministry. And really, the guy is really in trouble. And I'm so glad, because this mob are going to turn us down the toilet. You know, they're leading us over the cliff with Bowen just alone, let alone all the other, you know, things that Chalmers has got up his sleeve.
But the Dutton bashing isn't working, Peter. I mean...
Well, I was going to ask you that, because border protection's never been a strong suit for Labor. They've spent 10 years making Peter Dutton the bogeyman, saying that he's too hard, he's too tough. And now they're trying to say, don't believe what we've said, the bloke's, you know, soft on paedophile.
And the branches and electorate I'm travelling, they want to feel safe under Dutton, and bashing him, it galvanises support for Dutton and does the exact opposite. It's like when they bash Trump, they only want to get behind and support him even more. So it's interesting to see how this is playing out.
And this issue of detainees is really cut through with the community. I mean, not every issue does prove, but how safe people feel in their suburbs. They don't think this makes sense. They know that, you know, these people are here and they're getting welfare as well. They don't like it.
And again, the misjudgment, the lack of planning, the lack of forethought, and we are the ones who are going to pay the price. And of course, it's a signal to all the boat smugglers. You know, they're all starting to come on down. And, you know, the trouble is that, we're going to find that there'll be appeal after appeal. These people are going to be here for a long time, and we are so vulnerable. Everyone is so angry about it.
Anastasia Palaszczuk, I'm going to go to her. She's pretty embattled, Tina, and she's had the unions come and distance themselves from her. They say we need a new face and all of that talk, you know, where that's headed. She says, I'm here for the long haul. And then today you get power brokers out saying, we need another face to lead the government at the next election. How long's she got, do you think?
Not long, a couple of months. I think she'll set herself up something to stay involved heavily with the Olympics. That'll be her main game. And, she knows she's on the way out.
She'll do a deal with them, I'm sure, to say, OK, I'll go.
Beyond deals.
But I think, you know, just so she can get that Olympic thing, I think she'll go quietly.
And she wants to beat the Beattie record. I think the election's due in October. She surpasses Beattie in March or April, and I think that she'll hang on until then, and then they'll take her out.
Mid-next year.
But she's the invisible woman.
I'm noticing that bit of Christmas bling there on your shoulder. I read something today, and it's that season, of course. We put up the tree, and then all the councils and all the elites tell us we're not allowed to celebrate Christmas. We can't use the word. I mean, this is a country with a strong Christmas Christian tradition. I think it's the Whittlesea Council down in Victoria. They've banned Christmas celebrations, and plenty of others are doing it as well. What do you think?
this is a white-hot topic. You know, we are so over being told that we cannot have carols, we cannot celebrate one of the most holy periods. Even if you're not religious, Christmas is very, you know, special and sacred to people. And I just think these councils who have been invaded by Greens, you know, this is the woke anti-Christian lobby that is just trying to, you know, ruin Christmas, ruin our lives, and I just think we've got to really stand up. Before, you know, people are mindless when they vote for councillors, and I think they need to get engaged and think about who you're doing, because they've got too much power over our lives.
I think clearly these councillors don't have any children, because my grandchildren are already over the top obsessed with Santa and baby Jesus and all the good things. So,
beautiful.
Yeah.
I know. But we also we celebrate Deepavali and iftar dinners for Muslims. I know a lot of Jews put up a Christmas tree.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's one or the other, does it? Does it, Tina?
And I think it's a time where everyone should come together. We all celebrate one another's differences of religions, as you said. And so one time a year we can do that. You know, they shouldn't spoil.
And there's such a focus on family, and this is the trouble. I think that we're all feeling so vulnerable and under attack. Your family and these family traditions are so important, and we've got to foster them, encourage them.
And let's not forget the doggies at Christmas, Peter.
Oh, yeah, right. And the other thing I have to say too, you know, we went from forgetting Christmas was about Christ and family, focused on the commercialism, and now they even want to wipe away that as well.
They're appalling.
Thank you, girls.
There's pretty good Santa at David Jones.
Oh.
And you can take your dog.
I've got to go. I can talk to these girls all night. But Rita Panahy's down there thumping the table, so we'll go to Rita now. See you next week.